The metallic click of handcuffs sealed my fate, condemned for the crime of being invisible. But a single word from a stranger in a black car would rewrite my entire existence. The bite of the November wind was a familiar enemy. It found every tear in my worn jacket, every hole in my thin socks, and it gnawed at my bones with a cold, relentless hunger. For 2 years, this had been my life. The park bench was my living room, the public library my office, and the sky my unforgiving ceiling. My name is Jeremiah, and I used to build houses. I knew the feel of a solid oak beam, the smell of fresh-cut pine. Now the only thing I owned was a small, leather-bound sketchbook and a half-chewed pencil. It was the last piece of the man I used to be. I was sitting on a bench in what they call the financial district. I knew I was taking a risk. People like me were not welcome here. We were seen as stains on the pristine canvas of their success. But the library had just closed, and I needed a place to rest my aching back before the long walk to the shelter. I was sketching the intricate gargoyles on the old bank building across the street, losing myself in the lines and shadows, when a shadow fell over me. "You can't be here," a voice said. It was sharp, clipped, and reeked of authority. I looked up to see 2 police officers. One was young, his face a mask of nervous uncertainty. The other, older, with a thick mustache and tired, cynical eyes, had his hand resting on his holstered weapon. "I'm not doing anything, officer," I said, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Just resting my feet." "This is private property," the older one, Miller according to his name tag, grunted. "We've had complaints. Someone said you were harassing passers-by." My heart sank. Harassing. I hadn't spoken a word to anyone. I had made a point to shrink myself, to become as invisible as possible. "That's not true," I pleaded, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just an artist, see?" I held up my sketchbook. It felt like offering a piece of my soul for inspection. The younger officer leaned in, a flicker of interest in his eyes, but Miller swatted his hand away. "I don't care what you are. You're loitering. I want you to pack up your junk and move along. Now." Junk. He called my sketchbook, my last connection to my craft, my dignity, junk. A hot wave of anger, something I hadn't felt in a long time, washed over me. "I have a right to sit on a public bench," I said, my voice a little louder than I intended. That was my mistake. Miller's eyes narrowed. "You have a right to do what I tell you to do. Now get up, or I'm taking you in." My body ached with a fatigue that went bone deep. I didn't have the energy for this fight. Defeated, I started to slowly gather my things. My sketchbook slipped from my numb fingers and fell open on the ground. A drawing of my late wife, Sarah, staring up at the gray sky. My breath hitched. I bent down quickly to retrieve it, to protect her image from the city's grime. "He's reaching for something," the young officer yelled, his voice cracking with panic. Before I could even process the words, I was slammed face first against the cold, hard back of the bench. The rough iron dug into my cheek. My sketchbook was kicked aside. A knee pressed into my back, and my arms were wrenched behind me with painful force. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the cold air, a sound of finality. "I wasn't reaching for anything," I choked out, the taste of rust and dirt in my mouth. "It was just my book." "Tell it to the judge," Miller sneered, hauling me to my feet. As they shoved me towards the patrol car, a spectacle for the well-dressed people hurrying by, I felt a familiar shame burn through me. But then, through the haze of humiliation and pain, my eyes locked on something. A sleek black sedan, the kind that costs more than any house I ever built, was stopped in the traffic. In the back seat, behind the tinted window, sat a black man. He was my age, maybe a little older, dressed in a suit so sharp it could cut glass. He was on the phone, but he wasn't speaking. He had lowered it, his gaze fixed directly on me. I expected to see pity in his eyes, or maybe disgust. It's what I always saw. But this was different. There was no pity. There was a cold, calculated fury. It was an expression of such intense, focused anger that it startled me. It wasn't directed at me. It was directed at the officers, at the situation, at the entire world that had allowed this to happen. He held my gaze, and in that fleeting moment, I didn't feel like a homeless man being arrested. I felt Seen. And then he slowly, deliberately, lifted his phone back to his ear and spoke one clear clipped word that I could read on his lips even from across the street. Cancel it. The world shrank to a cold, concrete box. The stench of stale sweat, urine, and despair clung to the air like a shroud. I was shoved into a holding cell with 3 other men, each lost in his own private hell. The metal bench was colder than the pavement outside, and it seemed to suck what little warmth I had left right out of my body. My sketchbook, my pencil confiscated as personal effects. I felt naked without them, like a snail torn from its shell. Officer Miller had processed me with a kind of bored contempt, his every action designed to remind me of my worthlessness. I was just another number, another piece of human debris to be swept off the city's pristine streets. I resigned myself to a long, cold night, followed by a court appearance where my invisible status would be made official. I'd be lucky to get away with time served. Hours crawled by. I drifted into a half-sleep, my dreams filled with the ghost of my wife's smile and the solid weight of a framing hammer in my hand. I was jolted awake by the screech of the cell door. A guard I hadn't seen before stood in the opening, a clipboard in his hand. He didn't look at the other men. His eyes found me immediately. Jeremiah Wallace. I flinched, startled to hear my full name spoken aloud. I hadn't heard it in months. "Yes," I croaked. "You're free to go." The words didn't register at first. They were alien, a language I no longer understood. The other men in the cell stared. "What?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Paperwork's been cleared. All charges dropped. Let's go," he said impatiently. "Someone's waiting." Confusion was a thick fog in my brain. I was led back to the front desk, where Officer Miller was arguing with the desk's sergeant. He turned as I approached, his face a thundercloud of disbelief. "What the hell is this? Who pulled strings for this vagrant?" The sergeant just shrugged, shoving my plastic bag of effects across the counter. "Orders from downtown. Way above my pay grade and yours. Give him his stuff back." I numbly took the bag. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my sketchbook. I clutched it to my chest like a shield. Miller stared at me, his eyes burning with a frustrated rage. He wanted to say something, to put me back in my place, but for the first time he was powerless. I didn't wait for him to find his voice. I turned and pushed through the heavy doors, stumbling out into the biting night air. The street was dark and empty. The city's heartbeat slowed to a murmur. I stood there, disoriented and shivering, with no idea where to go or what had just happened. Then, a soft hum broke the silence. The same black sedan I had seen earlier pulled up to the curb, its engine a deep, confident purr. The back window glided down with silent precision. The man from before was there, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the dashboard lights. The fury I had seen earlier was gone, replaced by a calm, unnerving intensity. He looked me up and down, not with pity, but with a kind of appraisal, as if he were examining a piece of architecture for structural integrity. "Jeremiah Wallace," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was a low, resonant baritone. "My name is Marcus Thorne. Get in." Fear warred with a desperate, burgeoning curiosity. Every instinct I had honed on the streets screamed at me to run. But where would I run to? Back to a bench? A shelter? This man, this impossible event, was the only thing that had broken the miserable pattern of my life in 2 years. With nothing left to lose, I opened the heavy door and slid into the back seat. The door closed with a solid, satisfying thud, sealing out the wind and the world. The interior smelled of rich leather and something else. Success. It was warm. I hadn't felt this kind of warmth in years. We drove in silence. I watched the city lights slide by, a smear of gold and white against the dark glass. I kept my hands on my sketchbook, the only thing that felt real in this dream. We didn't head towards the shelters or the poorer parts of town. We drove back towards the financial district, to the very place I had been arrested. The car stopped directly across from the old bank, its stone gargoyles looking down at us like ancient, silent witnesses. Marcus Thorne didn't look at me. He stared at the building, his jaw tight. "That bank," he said, his voice laced with cold steel. Its board of directors is a collection of relics who believe men who look like you and me are a blight on their scenery. They had you thrown away like trash in front of their temple of money." He finally turned his head, and his eyes locked onto mine. They were not the eyes of a savior. They were the eyes of a fighter looking for a weapon. "So I'm going to buy it," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper that carried more weight than a shout. "And you, Jeremiah, the artist they tried to erase? You are going to be the architect who designs what rises from its rubble." The words hung in the heated air of the car, so audacious, so utterly impossible, that for a moment I thought I was hallucinating, that the cold had finally cracked my mind. Me, a man who had forgotten the feeling of a mattress, the architect of a skyscraper. It was a fantasy woven from desperation and madness. I started to laugh, a dry, broken sound that turned into a cough. "You're not serious," I finally managed to say, looking at him for any sign of a joke, a trick. Marcus Thorne's expression was as solid and unyielding as granite. "I have never been more serious in my life, Mr. Wallace. I didn't get where I am by making jokes." He leaned forward, the intensity in his eyes pinning me to the leather seat. "I looked up your name. Jeremiah Wallace, 30 years of experience. You built the Ellison Tower, the Westgate Bridge renovations. You didn't just build houses. You built landmarks. And then your wife got sick. The medical bills piled up. Your business partner cleaned you out, and the world threw you away. They see a bum. I see a master craftsman who was dealt a bad hand. He had laid my entire life bare in 30 seconds. Shame and awe warred within me. That night I didn't go back to the shelter. He put me up in a hotel suite so luxurious it felt like a foreign country. For the first time in 2 years, I slept in a bed, showered with hot water until the steam fogged the mirrors, and ate a meal that didn't come from a bin or a soup kitchen. The next morning, a man delivered a suitcase full of new clothes and a briefcase. Inside the briefcase wasn't money. It was a set of professional-grade architectural pencils, fresh sketchbooks, a high-end laptop with design software, and a simple note. "Show me what you see." Marcus didn't give me charity. He gave me a purpose. For the first time in years, the fog of despair began to lift. I spent every waking hour in that suite, the ghosts of my old skills returning to my hands like long-lost friends. I didn't just design a building. I designed a statement. I poured every cold night, every dismissive glance, every ounce of humiliation I had ever felt onto those pages, and transformed it into glass, steel, and light. It wasn't another soulless corporate tower. It was a multi-use space with the ground floor dedicated to a public art gallery and a business incubator for minority entrepreneurs, a place for the community, a place of welcome, not exclusion. Its centerpiece was a soaring atrium designed to catch the morning light with support beams that crisscrossed like sheltering hands. The months that followed were a blur of hostile takeovers, legal battles, and city planning meetings. Marcus Thorne moved with the brutal efficiency of a shark, dismantling the old bank's board and acquiring the property with a single-minded determination that was terrifying and exhilarating to witness. And through it all, he had me by his side, the architect. I went from being invisible to being the man in the sharp suit, unrolling blueprints on massive mahogany tables. My voice, once hoarse from disuse, now confidently explaining load-bearing capacities and aesthetic visions. Today was the groundbreaking. I stood on a temporary stage, the crisp November air a stark contrast to the biting wind I remembered. This time I wore a tailored wool coat. A crowd of journalists and dignitaries buzzed before us. Marcus was at the podium, speaking about the future, about opportunity, about rewriting the narrative of the city. My eyes scanned the crowd. And then I saw him. On the edge of the police barricade assigned to crowd control was Officer Miller. Our eyes met across the distance. I saw the flash of recognition, the disbelief, the jaw-dropping confusion as he looked at me on the stage, then at the massive banner behind me bearing the project's name, the Wallace Center for Arts and Enterprise. His face, once a mask of sneering authority, was now slack with shock. He was small. He was insignificant. I felt nothing for him. No anger, no desire for revenge. Just a quiet, profound finality. I had already won. Marcus finished his speech and turned to me, a rare smile touching his lips. He handed me a silver shovel. I gripped its smooth, cold handle. It felt heavier and more real than any tool I had ever held. As we walked to the mound of prepared earth, I saw the former chairman of the bank standing in the crowd, a ghost at the funeral of his own empire. I thought of the man I was just a few months ago, huddled on a bench, sketching to forget. Now, I wasn't just drawing the city. I was about to remake it. Marcus and I plunged our shovels into the soil together. The sound of the blades breaking ground wasn't just the start of a new building. It was the sound of a foundation being laid, one that no one could ever kick out from under me again.